stragglers. Can you hear me back there?
Yes, good.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you so much for being here. We have a wonderful panel tonight that are going to cover different parts of Tryon history. I'm Julia Calhoun. I will be your moderator tonight, and we welcome you to Jeopardy! Which is what this feels like a little bit. We're going to take different segments. I'd like to introduce the panel first. On my far right is Robert Lang. Recently became a historian, although he didn't know that was his fate. But luckily for us, he did, and he has uncovered a tremendous amount of Tryon history that we did not know about. And then next to him is Dr. Joseph Fox, eminent educator and leading citizen of Tryon. Then next to him, Ambrose Mills, who is another leading citizen and direct descendant of the original Mills family. Next to me is Alan Leonard, who some of you might know. Alan's family has been here for a very, very long time as well. And then Jack. And Jack and Pam Wilson are going to be covering a fascinating part of Tryon history that really led to its founding in many ways. So I'm going to quickly begin. We're going to each do a little overview going chronologically. I have always been fascinated by ancient history, and Tryon has some. There's evidence, archaeological evidence of Native American activity in the area going back at least 11,000 years, certainly to the end of the Ice Age. And very concrete evidence of Cherokee activity going back at least 900 years, probably more. When I was growing up, we always thought of this area as the Cherokee hunting grounds, and that is absolutely true. It turns out there were a number of settlements in the region too. One named Exwalla that was on somewhere around the site of Tryon as far back as DeSoto's trek through here in 1540. It's on a map that he drew. And so there were permanent residents as well as hunters and fishermen. And all along the Packlet River Valley, you'll find a number of sites where there were camps where they would come for a season and hunt and fish. So they were around for a good while. One of the favorite activities when I was growing up is going out to Howard Gap Road to the tomato bottom in the spring after they turned the soil to plant the tomatoes because there were just tons of arrowheads. And it's still happening. So, that's a great activity to plan for next spring. There were a number of treaties that were struck between the British and the Cherokee over the years. There was also a treaty called the Whitehall Treaty in 1730 that was signed in London by several leaders of the Cherokee that had gone to meet George III. And one sort of ironic line in the treaty is that the British would honor, quote, "for as long as the mountains and rivers last and the sun shines," end quote. That means till next Tuesday. So at that point, settlers really began to pour into the area. One of the earliest known structures in the county is the Mills Plantation, which was built somewhere around 1740, if not before. I think Ambrose knows more about that than I do. Called Seven Hearths, which was moved here in the 1930s by the Brentnells. And that is at the corner, basically, of Harmonfield Road and 176. You will notice that there are also several cabins there. They were homesteads. They were not servants' quarters. And there's one that they actually have traced back to an original family. Most of the settlers came, of course, from the British Isles by way of Pennsylvania and Virginia. And this area certainly was familiar to them geographically in terms of the mountains and streams and so forth. Many were fleeing the British Isles for a number of reasons. And many Scottish Highlanders settled here, again, for the obvious familiarity of the area. Even when I was growing up, there were still Elizabethan words in the local language. I worked with a lady at Ronnie Marcello's rug shop who used wonderful, she always would say, "Would you fetch me that spool of yarn on yon table?" She never said yonder, it was always yarn, and there were other wonderful terms. And those terms still survive as much as they do on the Outer Banks. In 1755, the Cherokee had struck a treaty with the South Carolina governor, which of course was not honored either. And it was following a Cherokee victory over the British that one of their leaders, Ostenaco, went to London to sign a peace treaty. And a wonderful portrait of him was painted by Sir Joshua Reynolds, which survives to this day. There were several years of relative peace after that, and then in 1767, the colonial governor of North Carolina, William Tryon, trekked all the way over here to sign another treaty, and signed it on top of a mountain which they named in his honor. That's how we got Tryon Peak and Tryon Mountain. The first time the word Tryon ever appeared in print was on the 1772 map of John Colleton, where it shows Tryon Mountain. And then the town subsequently was actually named after the mountain later on. There continued to be a lot of unrest leading up, of course, to the Revolution. And that was basically first declared in Hillsborough, which is known as the capital of the backwoods. It's about 10 miles north of Chapel Hill. And that was there were articles of basically Declaration of Independence, which they called the North Carolina Declaration, that took place in 1774 and 1775. And I'm now going to sort of turn this over to Ambrose to talk a little bit about the Revolution here and the Over Mountain Men and so forth.
Well, this history is about Tryon, and prior to the Revolution there wasn't a Tryon, and there wasn't much going on here. It was more of a wilderness, but there probably were some Scots-Irish settlers in the hills who had come here to get away from the King of England, and they had no love for him or his friends here. Which leads me to his friends with my ancestor, the first Ambrose Mills, came to the colonies as a child. His family moved down to Virginia, and then he married there, came to Camden, Pine Tree, and it was there that he left his wife to take his 14-year-old son to go and fight the Indians in the French and Indian War. While they were away, the local Indians attacked the plantation and massacred everybody there, including his wife. He said when he got home and found his wife gone, it was the saddest day of his life. He no longer liked living there after this massacre, so he moved to what was then really the frontier, what now is Polk County, but was Tryon County at the time. The treaty that Julia speaks of was signed near here, and there is a monument next to the Seven Hearts that commemorates that. And I saw a photo recently with an Indian, Arsene Thompson, representing the Cherokee tribe, and a 14-year-old explorer scout, Ambrose Mills, was present for that. As you say, the Indians did not honor the treaty, and certainly the settlers did not. So there was a lot of dissension. And that was settled locally at what became Howard Gap. The Battle of Round Mountain was in the brochure that we saw. It says that the faithful Indian guide Skyuka led Captain Howard, who was 16 years old at the time, led his militia overnight, and they surprised the Indian warriors, and they dispatched all of them. The warriors, the braves, their wives, their children, the dogs, everything. So somebody said, why? Why did you kill the children? Because they would grow up and kill my children, he said. Colonel Mills was already leading a group of loyalists at that time, and it was said that among the Indians that were at Howard Gap were some Tories, loyalists, dressed as Indians. But Colonel Mills was not there because he was in jail in Salisbury for treason against the new Continental Authority. But he was paroled by taking an oath to abandon the king. But he had his fingers crossed, and that didn't matter. He led a lot of loyalists in the local battles, skirmishes, because we didn't have big battles here until Kings Mountain, where Colonel Mills was the leader of a group of loyalists under Patrick Ferguson, and that's where the Over Mountain men who came to fight Ferguson met and defeated him. They were so angry because Patrick Ferguson, major of the British Army, in fact, the only British soldier at Kings Mountain, everybody else was loyalists and patriots. Ferguson said to the patriots, rebels he called them, said, if you don't lay down your arms, pledge allegiance to the king, I will march my army over the mountains, burn your houses, turn your women and children out into the wilderness to the mercy of the savages. His idea was to intimidate them, but he misunderstood the nature of the settlers. It made them determined to destroy him. So they gathered from the mountain coves and valleys a ragtag army of called Over Mountain men, called that because they came from Watauga, over the mountains, over Roan Mountain, picking up more and more as they came. So finally, Ferguson recognized the threat and was on his way to Charlotte to escape when at Alexander's Ford, a few miles, 20 miles from here, they found out that the Patriots were on their way. They made a hasty retreat, but they were followed by the Patriots and met at Kings Mountain and defeated. Then, at the end of the battle, Colonel Mills and his son, William Mills, Major Mills, were captured along with all the others who survived from the Loyalists. Colonel Mills and a group of 30 were court-martialed, what we call a kangaroo court, and 9 of them were sentenced to hang. An interesting side note here that Frances McCain here, one of her ancestors, Ben Cleveland, was the leader in hanging Colonel Mills.
But we're good friends, though. We're good friends.
Interesting thing about Ben Cleveland was that he was a big man, so heavy in those days. They had to have 2 horses because one would tire out as he was riding. And later in his life, he weighed 450 pounds.
See, we're all short and fat.
wife, who was only about 20 miles away from there, had heard, and she was there for the court-martial and the hanging, and sat under the gallows tree all night in the rain with her infant daughter. Major William Mills either escaped or was allowed to go, hid out on it was now called World's Edge in a cave because some of the patriots were still looking for revenge. But he went on to settle in that area over Mills Gap. Mills River is named after him, and he started the apple industry, which is being celebrated this very weekend in Hendersonville. He started that in that area. His son, Marvel Mills, now we come to the Seven Hearts, was a house built for Marvel Mills by William and his dad, Colonel Ambrose Mills.
Following the revolution, everybody was fairly busy trying to get settled, trying to carve out their farms and homes in what had been wilderness. One of the major activities that was going on, that the only one organized one that I'm aware of, was when low country gentlemen would come up here to find a flat place to race their horses. That was in the 1820s and 30s, and so we go on through the 19th century with the activity being primarily settlers getting in and farming. I will mention that when the great forced march of the Cherokee on the Trail of Tears took place, a number of Cherokee that lived in the area found refuge and found places to hide out, which is the only reason they didn't end up out west. And they basically were a great deal of what formed the eastern band of the Cherokee. And luckily for us, we have that wonderful culture still alive right here, and we will have the Cherokee Warriors of the Anacatawa doing a wonderful program of song and dance and story tomorrow at 1 o'clock down in front of the clock tower. So if you can come, please do that. We really don't have a great deal of major import going on until we approach the Civil War. And I'm going to let Mr. Leonard take over with that part of the story. That would help, wouldn't it?
Okay, thank you. I will make this comment to sort of reach back and tie things together a little bit. Ambrose mentioned, what was going on here before the Revolutionary War, and there was some sparse settlement. And during the 1760s, when the boundary line was drawn by Governor Tryon, some families did come in after that. And two of the better known families that those of us who've been here for a while are almost all related to were the Williams and the Langfords. And my cousin Donnie Carruth's out there someplace. I'm not sure when the Carruths came in, but they came in very, very quickly, very close on the heels of those families. And Julia, you mentioned the Cherokee that remained in the area. Like a lot of Southeasterners who sent their saliva in to be analyzed by Ancestry or elsewise, I came back to 2% Native American. And sure enough, in my family tree, which goes back to the Langford family, there's a female, probably 6th, 7th great grandmother who was Cherokee. So a little bit of that lingers still in Polk County. By the time, though, just in the decade leading up to the Civil War, Polk County was formed in the late 1850s, 1858 to 1859, from Rutherford and Henderson counties. And I think Rutherford County just wanted to get rid of this wild, woolly, useless area over here. So Polk was formed on a second try after one failure in the legislature and elsewhere. But just on the eve of the Civil War, Polk County was a part of the economy. It was a part of the status quo, which is what the Civil War was all about. It's true that in 1830s or so, as part of the internal improvements, the Howard Gap Road, pieces of that still exist, of course. The parts that is that haven't slid down the mountain lately. The Howard Gap Road, came through Polk County over near Mimosa in that area, and proceeded through Howard Gap, connecting the low country of South Carolina to western North Carolina, Hendersonville, and Asheville, and beyond. And also, Polk County was relatively close to areas that were starting to build up: Greenville, Spartanburg, Rutherfordton, and Hendersonville. So Polk County wasn't remote. It was sort of part of the economy, part of the status quo, in a way that a lot of the far western counties of North Carolina were not. But it's said that when the war finally broke out, and of course the perception was that the war had been started by Lincoln, because Lincoln had acted in unconstitutional ways by calling for troops to invade the southern states. When that came about, things were pretty heated, and it was said that at that point in time, all the mountains felt mighty Confederate. And a lot of men rallied the flag early on. It's a fact that a very large percentage, a disproportionately large percentage of North Carolina Confederate cavalry came from the mountain counties for some reason. But Polk County, though, it's noted, we were still sort of a backwater in spite of our connections to the outside, and it was noted pretty early on that we lagged a little bit in volunteerism. There might have been sentiment, but the men weren't willing to come forward in a way that the authorities thought was appropriate. But in May of 1861, 100 volunteers formed a company, became Company K of the 16th North Carolina Regiment. Of course, that war, like all wars, was supposed to be over with in 90 days, before Christmas, 6 months, within a year, or whatever, just like all wars, but it wasn't. So in about March of 1862 and thereafter, other companies were formed from the county. The 60th North Carolina, the 62nd, and 54th, for a total of 4 companies, for totaling around 400 men. There were about 100 men each. The 16th North Carolina, that first company to form, went to the Army of Northern Virginia and fought under Lee. And as a matter of fact, 16th North Carolina, including the Polk County boys, fought under the command of Robert E. Lee longer than any other regiment and companies in the entire Confederate Army. The 54th also went to the Army of Northern Virginia. The 60th and the 62nd went to the Army of Tennessee. In addition to that, there were Polk County men that went to the adjoining counties. There were men that joined cavalry units, such as the one that formed in Henderson County. There were men who went to the artillery. Must have happened, but I don't think I've seen any of them. But total Polk County men who went to the Confederacy, and this gives some gauge of the sentiment. The total was around 500, and of the 500, about 150 lost their lives due to various causes, which is a 30% death rate if this history major's math is anywhere near correct. But you look back at history, the Civil War was by far the most costly to Polk County in terms of the men who lost their lives. As my friends to the left will explain, there was always sporadic violence in the county, and that heightened in 1864 and 1865 as things deteriorated, and they'll elaborate on some aspects of that. But it's also true that for the last year and a half to maybe 3 months of the war, some Polk County men went across the mountain, as they said, to join federal forces in Knoxville and other locations in East Tennessee. And some of those people hadn't served before. Some were being sought for Confederate service. Some had been Confederates who had deserted. Those men joined the 2nd and 3rd North Carolina Mounted Infantry, U.S., that's a U.S. outfit, and 1 or 2 joined the 8th Illinois Cavalry, strangely enough, over in East Tennessee. And there were about 20 men from Polk County that served under the Stars and Stripes during the war. So the ratio of those who served as Confederates to Federals about 25 to 1. It's also true, interestingly enough, that there were Confederates who from Polk County, especially the ones who fought in the Army of the Tennessee, went to various prisons, like my second great-grandfather from Halbert's Cove did. He went to Camp Douglas, Illinois, and there came a time at Camp Douglas where the men who were in prison there were approached and given several alternatives. And one of the alternatives was to put on blue, don't have to fight your friends, go west and fight Native Americans. How about that? Beats sitting in prison, right? And some men turned that down, but others agreed. They were called galvanized Yankees. So there are a few Polk County guys that went west, and I don't know that any of them ever did return. It looked good out there to them, I suppose. But they went west and fought Indians, guarded the Oregon and it's Santa Fe Trail, I believe. And some of them harvested grain in Minnesota and elsewhere. So there were a few men that did that. I don't know a lot, and I don't know that a lot was recorded about the home front during all that. I think it was probably typical of what was going on elsewhere in the South that we're more or less familiar with. There is one surviving letter from a Confederate who served, I think, in the 54th North Carolina in Northern Virginia. He got leave and he came home, and the thing that stood out in his mind was the wonderful reception that he got from the young ladies back here in Polk County. So that at least was positive. Now, as far as anything that came remotely close to fisticuffs here in Polk County, I'm talking about between the official opposing sides, was the fact that if you've looked at the historic marker out there at the Lynn Bridge, you know that in April of 1865, Stoneman's U.S. Cavalry came through Polk County on a raid through western North Carolina, as it's characterized. But like most tourists that come through Polk County even today, they were primarily thinking Asheville. So they spent the night and moved on through Howard Gap, where they faced a very light resistance and went on to Hendersonville and beyond. And of course, the war was over within a few weeks. I just thought of one thing. The very last overt conflict in western North Carolina during the war was the Battle of Asheville. And the Battle of Asheville is noteworthy for the fact that it was almost entirely bloodless. That was, except for one Polk County soldier who was about, I guess he was about my third great uncle, Uncle Franz Halbert. Of course, that was Halbert's Cove family. Uncle Franz Halbert of the 64th North Carolina managed to catch a bullet when nobody else did at the Battle of Asheville, and he was reported as the only casualty of that battle. It was a Polk County boy, Franz Halbert. It's interesting to me also that of those fellows that hid out or joined Union forces, a lot of them left Polk County or seemed to have stayed away. A lot of them moved to Hendersonville, Buncombe County, where they thought maybe they would get a better reception, possibly. Uncle Franz married a Jones from the East Flat Rock section of Henderson County. They were stout Unionists, and it's recorded that Uncle Franz, who was a Confederate, the last casualty at the Battle of Asheville, was buried in the Jones Cemetery on Upward Road, and I've been out there. Everybody has a marked grave except Uncle France for some reason. Uncle France did not get any official mention or remembrance with his unionist in-laws. This is where Robert is going to pick up, and I'll just say, Robert has brought all this in a moment after these. Robert's going to pick up on something I'm going to say here. And Robert has done incredible things in the last 4 years. He's the reason that we're here today. He's thrown incredible light on history, and we appreciate him so much for that. I was going to give some forecast to conclude my remarks on what I think Robert will pick up on, which is Tryon, as you know, was non-existent at the time of the Civil War. We were woods with maybe a path or a crude road going through. Because of the Civil War, the status quo collapsed, which included the Mills family. The Mills, as one of the Caruths explained to me, the Mills family basically owned the good bottomland, and the Caruths and a few others had the mountainsides. So that caused some of that real estate to change hands within a few years after the war. Lemuel Wilcox came here, bought Mills land, about 4,000 acres. Out of that, he carved the town of Tryon, probably him knowing that the railroad was coming through, so it was a good investment. So Tryon was not here at the time of the Civil War. Tryon would not be here in its present form, but for the Civil War. And I'll also say that Lemuel Wilcox was certainly not the first Northerner. He was a Union veteran of the war. He was a Pennsylvania artilleryman. He came down here and was one of the first among a lot of people that came here from up north and elsewhere in the country and the world, just as many of you have. And they're responsible for what Tryon is. So Tryon is a result of the war, and is very much a part of the New South. Very, very much a part of the New South. Thank you.
One comment I'll make real quickly, that my in-law relatives, who are of the old Williams family in the county, informed me some time ago that the town of Sunnyview never seceded from the Union. Just so I knew that piece of information.